I'd like to give the floor to Larry now, and then we'll come back to Sergey. And Larry, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Pleased to be here. So, let me just move this down here. So the title was Procurement Outsourcing, Can It Bring Value to the Business? So before we start, there we go. Just a snapshot. Steve gave a very good outline of who I am, what I am, and there's some of the companies that I have had the fortunate to work for. 3 of them are private sector companies that have to follow public procurement processes, so that's the ultimate challenge. And Greencore, as a little bit of trivia, is the world's largest sandwich manufacturer. So if you ever wanted to know who it was, it's Greencore. So that's who I am, and I think Steve explained about myself. So, can it bring value to the business? Can procurement outsourcing? We've had Ellie give some great insight along with Debbie. Yes, I say, but there's always a but. There's always a but to these things, and I'm just listing those here, and we're going to just go into a little bit more detail on the bullet points that you see here. A lot of them, it's no surprise, have been covered by Ellie and Debbie in some way. I don't believe in partnerships. So on the 4th bullet point, you see not a partner, which I expand on later. And you have to measure your success. But let's crack on. Oh, we've got the 3-box model. That's good, isn't it? So here's the 3-box or the 4-box model, which most people know about. Market on the left-hand side, spend going across the bottom. So top left-hand corner, I put make sure that they're on the Christmas card list. These are the few or only suppliers where you can get that particular category from, or as a widget that you could only get from one place, and without that you have a problem. 2 of the companies I worked for were water companies, and in the UK there's only 1 chlorine supplier in all of the UK, so they would be in the top left box, and I wouldn't suggest you outsource that. You look after them personally yourself. Bottom left, nuisance little value, that's the 80% of transactions, 20% of the value. They're your MRO items. If you're in a manufacturing environment, they're the ones you would want to try and aggregate, put together, and ideally move them across to the bottom left-hand corner, which you can also outsource as applicable. Things like packaging would be usually in that bottom right-hand corner if you're a big distributor in some way. Top right-hand corner, I put in the little thing there called help, and a lot of the time you hear that you never outsource those that are important to your business, but sometimes you just don't know. You don't have that expertise. I had the pleasure of being the purchasing director of Aer Lingus. At the time, it wasn't part of IAG, which includes BA and Iberia. It was on its own. And I was responsible for buying fuel. I knew nothing about buying fuel for airlines. So I outsourced it. I didn't outsource it to a consultancy. I found a guy, semi-retired Australian, who actually worked for a fuel company. And he was wonderful. He was wonderful. And I will talk a little bit more about that later on. So going back to that question, I would say top left, you never outsource. Bottom left, bottom right, you do if you need to. Top right, to do it in a considered way. And generally, top left, top right are the ones that are core to your business, so they're the ones you want to keep close to yourself. Oh, top tip. Another reason why you might want to outsource, and I think it's been mentioned, where you don't have the technology to create a step change, you need technology, and maybe it's a software that you can procure, but maybe it's better to outsource the whole process. You need a step change in performance. Every business, everywhere, anywhere in the world needs a step change. And in some ways with outsourcing, you need to be humble. You can't be great at everything. And if you actually want to go from vinyl to the cloud, maybe you need help in that, and therefore outsourcing it is the fastest way. 3 years have passed. I'm a firm believer of working in 3 year cycles. So if you've done something for 3 years, like if you have a strategy in your department and it's 3 years old, I would say it's time to have a new one. Change is good. Refreshing things are good. If you've had a relationship internally or externally for 3 years, you need to test it to see if it's still as hungry as it was, as good as it was when you started 3 years ago. In a lot of cases, you can do better. You outsource it if you have a problem. And that's an interesting one. I've heard the phrase many times, you don't outsource a problem. And I think that came out in some conversations earlier on. I'm a believer of actually, I would say you can knowingly outsource a problem, because solving the problem might take you more time than actually outsolving and resolving the problem. So I would say, if you are going to outsource a problem, know what you're outsourcing. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. You heard it a lot from Ellie about the need to get internal buy-in, the right culture. Of course, classically, you would say commitment from top management is required behind that. If you don't have a history or you haven't done much outsourcing, of course, you're going to struggle. There's going to be resistance internally. You know, there's always, you have to be humble. When you're outsourcing, I'm a firm believer you have to be humble. I was humble enough to say I knew nothing about aviation fuel. I also knew it was a risk if I did try to get involved. But if you haven't got that history, it's going to be a challenge. And usually it happens within lots of organisations. It's them and us. We've always done it this way. Now you've got someone from the outside doing it. And in some cases, people will try and make it fail. I'm a firm believer change is good. And we'll talk more about that later on. And is your organisation one that drives for performance, drives for success? If it is, you should be outsourcing. And in some cases, it's easier to get a performance change by outsourcing. It's more challenging, as it said earlier on, is managing the outsource to deliver that success. You need the right provider and not a partner. And by that I mean it's all to do with tension. I believe in tension in a relationship, and you don't know. I've never really heard anyone else say this, but I'm a firm believer in positive tension, not destructive tension. You want both sides to keep hungry in the relationship. You know, it's a bit like at marriage. You know, is the marriage still as keen, as hungry in year one as it will be in year 3 or 4? And it's a lot of it in a business environment is to do with tension. You need to be honest enough with each other, and you need to continually have this positive tension, not destructive tension. The last thing I want to be is a partner with anyone. I believe you try before you buy. So if it's something you've not outsourced before, take a subcategory or take an element of it before you buy it as a service or a product. It will test out the cultural fit between the two companies, but just as important, it will test out internally if you're ready to outsource. As I said, whatever you do outsource, expect it to be at least a 3-year relationship. It doesn't mean that it won't be longer, but what you're doing for at least 3 years. If you're intending to do it for something less than that, I would then challenge, is that the right thing to outsource? Work with someone who has a track record, who has the experience. You don't want to be the first of anything. Be a fast follower, but having someone who's been there, done that before, de-risks the outsource. And part of that is getting real references. I'm sure many of you in your sourcing processes ask for references. When has anyone given a bad reference? I've actually had a few examples, but in general cases, most people give references that are going to be good news. by getting real references, that means you go to the marketplace and talk probably informally to those people to get the real take on the potential provider you're intending to use. You need knowledge. I think you heard it there from Ellie and Debbie. Don't outsource your brains. Be the intelligent client. And I can't emphasize that enough. It is amazing the amount of companies decide to outsource. When they outsource, they think they're outsourcing the whole intelligence of that particular category. Document your process. But again, I'm amazed the amount of organizations when they're intending to outsource something, they don't actually know what they're outsourcing. It's all right if it's a clear category that's got a specification and it's something that you manufactured in the past. But if it's a process, there's a good chance it hasn't been documented. So you need to map out your process. And the best way I think of doing that is with some brown paper and process mapping. And if you've never done that, it's a fascinating exercise. You learn a lot. And of course, then you can replicate that with the potential outsource providers to understand how would their process works. And therefore you see the differences, you see the roadblocks, and you see the opportunities as well. And if you need help mapping out your processes, I'm sure people like Procurement Central can help. And also shadow the expertise. If you're outsourcing something for expertise, don't just leave it to the expert. I had this young buyer, and I got him to shadow the aviation fuel buyer. So it was never 100% outsourced. To as far as the supply base is concerned, it was. But internally, there was a young guy who was learning the experience of buying aviation fuel. And I'm a firm believer in shadowing. You heard about fully and professionally managed is what Ellie said. I quite like that. And it's classic stuff. You need to, like any relationship, supply relationship management, contract management, whatever words you use, you need to manage the relationship. You need to manage the outsource. Again, I'm amazed that the amount of companies love putting KPIs, but they're never joint. They're always one way. They're always on the side of the outsourcer to do X, Y, and Z, and there's none that are actually you're signing up to as well. So again, the relationships. Oops, okay. For those who want to know, here's my cat. Oh. He's just turned up. So anyway, his name's Lucky. Lucky, you have to go now. So joint KPIs. Again, it shows a culture of business if they just want KPIs on one side of the relationship. Regular reviews. You heard from Helly and Debbie, like you could have regular reviews at all levels. I'm a firm believer in the quarterly review process. It's a moment of truth for both sides. Of course, when you first start off, you probably have monthly reviews, but it's amazing the amount of things get sorted out before a quarterly review to ensure that things are in the right order. A project plan with milestones, again, it's always one-sided, I feel, but if any outsource requires sign up on both sides, for people to sign up on both sides for clear responsibility and accountability, you need some form of project plan and a culture of learn, change, and improve. No outsource will be perfect. You need to learn from it. You need to change from it. You need to improve. But again, it's the culture of your business. It's if it's willing to learn, change, and improve. And aim to be a case study. There's nothing better than sharing success. Yeah. Aim for the top, aim for the best, and if you're a case study at the end of it, for the right reasons, there are case studies of disasters, but if you're a case study for the right reasons, it's something that will breed success. Success breeds success. You heard about processes. So what's the right area to outsource was one of the questions. Classically, it could come from a category plan. If you haven't got category management or you haven't introduced category management, start off with some category management training. There's nothing better than out of the training to come up with a category plan out of that category plan should have the logic of why you want to outsource certain products. And there are many people can help you with your category management training, but it's something that is extremely powerful when you try to sell it internally within your organization. There could be a business need or emergency, so you really have a need to do it, and therefore a lot of the barriers will be broken down. And as I said here, it could easily be a transactional process, and that's the classic BPO, business process outsourcing, and the procure to pay one is the classic one. So you're in some ways you're keeping the high level intelligence within your business, the category expertise, and you're outsourcing the in this case the procurement to pay process, the transactional process. But and I've been in businesses that are introduced a shared service center, and that's been interesting, where you've got anything from finance to marketing to procurement, all working in a shared service center. And it's amazing how resistant some parts of the organization are moving their transactional services to the shared service center. Personally, I loved it, because it just created a new environment that took away the transactional processes and put them into an area that had the expertise and skill to deliver. So can outsourcing bring value to your business is, I think, the last question we're coming on to. Value has hard and soft measures, which I'm sure everyone knows about. Finance generally like the hard measures. So when you talk about the soft measures, the soft skills, you can see their eyes close and they start yawning. So you need to know, whatever you're outsourcing, you need to know your costs. If you're outsourcing a transactional process, it's more than just the manpower costs. In my world, there are 4 elements to cost. So when people talk about cost savings, they actually usually mean price savings, but cost is made up of 4 things. It's the price, it's the volume, it's the process, and it's the technology. Price, volume, process, technology. They make up simplistically the 4 elements of cost. So you need to know your costs before you intend to outsource. If you don't, you need to get help. So what's a good return on investment? And of course, that's up for debate. I promise 1 to 4 for every pound, euro, or dollar spent. They get 4 back within a year. Most CFOs, finance people love that, and I find that's generally quite easy to deliver. And you should expect 1 to 7 at least. But deliver, if you promise 1 to 4, most people will nod their heads that they get it back in 1 year. So other areas which could be outsourced besides the ones we've just spoken about. Property management facilities is a classic one. I spoke to a major outsourced provider last week. They're extremely nervous in the current pandemic world, because of course, if you're a facility management and there aren't many people as many people going to be using those facilities, there is less volume for them going forward. If you have outsourced your property management facilities and it's a fixed price, I would reconsider that, because potentially in the new world, there will be less property and facilities that need managing, as more and more of us will be working from home. And the providers are extremely nervous, as we come out of this pandemic. It's an interesting conversation. Payroll, if you haven't outsourced your payroll, very easy one to do. Pension management, generally it's linked to payroll in some ways, but historically it's been finance controlled. Again, if procurement has the influence within an organization, you work with the finance. Generally, whoever's managed, if you've outsourced the pension management, it's usually been with the same provider for 20, 30, 40 years. And maybe it's time going back to having tension in the relationship to maybe consider a new provider. Legal support is always a fun one. The general counsel of the organisation like to work with their chosen legal lawyers' support. Again, procurement getting involved. Again, it's usually down to where you are in the organisation, how much you can influence people to get involved in legal support. But it's fascinating when you do. Another one, hire to retire. That's another process that is like a BPO process, or as many people say, hire to fire. And when that's been done, it works really well. But generally, it's the transactional process. I recommend you keep the business or introduce HR business partner in-house. So the interface with the department, the primary interface relationship management internally is kept in-house, but the whole hire to fire transactional process can easily be outsourced. Conclusion summary. So you need to maximize your outsourcing to deliver real value for the business. Easy to say, but it's a given. You know, the vast majority of transactional activity can be outsourced, and then category expertise or just technology that lacks in your business needs to be outsourced. Do not outsource your brains, as you heard in the previous discussion. Be the intelligent client. Develop your plan and expected benefits for outsourcing. If you need help, there is help around from outside people, because you need to have a plan. Try before you buy. Again, get to know each other. It's both ways. It's both ways. Before you take the major step, just make the small step. Like Confucius said, the longest part of a journey is taking the first step. So try before you buy. And get trained before you try. If you haven't got the expertise in outsourcing, if you haven't got the expertise in category management, I strongly recommend you get the training. And in the current world, whatever you do, keep safe. That is me done.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. Marina, can I hand back to you now?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you so much for your speech. I liked so much that you emphasized for multiple times about the similarities of cultures from the supplier and the provider of the services, the customer and the provider. And we can see that in the procurement, the people need to be trained, because this would allow us to speak the same language. It will allow us to articulate the task and to understand the needs. And of course, if you're precisely understanding and articulating the task, then in the process of interaction, you can be more constructive. In the process of interaction, you can come together to achieve the proper goal and to understand what you will check in the end of the day and how you assess the success of the project, or maybe lack of success. And that's what I really liked in your speech. Thank you so much what you emphasized, because it's not always when we take into account this element.